Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Tamara Alrifai, who is the Director of External Relations and Communications at UNRWA, who joins us from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Al Arabiya English. We're told that the humanitarian situation in Gaza is continuing to deteriorate. I mean, it's hard to believe that it could get any worse than it was, for example, last week when we spoke to humanitarians on the ground there. I mean, what is the latest on the situation there?
The latest is that mass movement continues as people get forcibly displaced from Gaza City, from the north of the Gaza Strip. So we're talking about nearly 400,000 people who have moved en masse from the north towards Khan Yunis and Deir al-Balah in the center area and towards the south. As a reminder, these two areas that people are moving to are areas that were expected to also witness famine now by the end of September. So people are forcibly displaced from where they are. Many of them, most of them, for maybe the 10th or 12th time in a row. Moving is not only excruciatingly painful, it's also very expensive. Moving a family costs over $3,000 between buying a tent, renting the land to put the tent, and renting transportation under the shelling and the bombing that continues, while all of us await a ceasefire that never seems to come. So situation keeps getting worse.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, hard to imagine where people are getting that kind of cash from, you know, in a part of the world where, you know, the economy has been paralyzed for 2 years. And we heard from the head of UNRWA, who described the situation there as, quote, absolutely unbearable, hell in all its possible facets. I mean, just tell us a bit about what your staff are telling you on the ground, because I gather you got 12,000 operatives on the ground there in Gaza. Is that right?
Yes, and that's a miracle. It's a miracle that UNRWA, with its 12,000 staff, remains the largest operating humanitarian agency in Gaza. But our staff are like Gazans, so they're also on the move. They move from one place to the other, and when they get to the next place, they set shop again. They manage a shelter. They give medical consultations. They help pump clean drinking water to distribute in the shelters. Our staff are telling us that the situation on them, just on the rest of Gazans, is unbearable, with people losing almost everything. Children losing on education, people losing loved ones and family members under the rubble, unable to bury them, but also now for the last 10 days or so, with the additional forced displacement from Gaza to other parts of the city, whatever people had left with them, they no longer have, because they're moving for yet the upteenth time and losing whatever little possessions they have while they're trying to save their lives and their children under the bombing. Having said that, many of UNRWA's services continue against the odds in mobile health clinics, in health centers where we're still able to operate, even though we've had to close 2 health points in the north of Gaza because of the bombing and the situation. But our colleagues continue doing any services, including a little bit of learning activities for children and psychological support for children inside the shelters.
Yeah, I'm sure that's hugely important for the children who've really seen nothing but violence for the last 24 months, horrific violence. We spoke to a representative of MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, last week. We understand they've now suspended activity in Gaza City. I mean, probably inevitable given the Israeli offensive there. But what does that mean for medical treatment, hospital treatment, the sort of healthcare provision in the enclave? Where are we in that regard?
It means that the near collapse of the healthcare system in the Gaza Strip is now even a step further to complete collapse. It means that pressure on the health points that continue to work is much, much greater. UNRWA has also had to stop its work in 2 health centers last week. You know, it's partly the bombing, partly the displacement, and partly also the lack of medical and surgical supplies. We've seen hospitals in Gaza, like the Kuwaiti hospitals, announce that They were no longer able to carry out surgeries, and they would limit themselves to life-saving interventions. That is due to the lack of supplies. And the lack of supplies is due to the Israeli authorities blocking the entry of food, medical supplies, and other essential supplies to the Gaza Strip, which means that even with UNRWA's medical staff that are trained on public health care, even if they remain available, they're running short of what they need, the most basic things, painkillers, gauze, to treat patients.
Yeah, and Tamara, I wanted to ask you because I was just looking at the Twitter feed of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, and they claim that 386 trucks are getting in every day. They say 404 trucks are awaiting collection in the Gaza Strip. I mean, I don't know how to interpret those numbers. Could you help us sort of decrypt that and contextualize those numbers, Tamara?
Yes, sure. Just in terms of figures, even before this war, between 500 and 600 trucks minimum were needed every day to cater to the population of Gaza, who was already then and there under a blockade. During the war, the access of humanitarian assistance, so the entry of food, medicine, fuel, clean drinking water, tents, blankets, etc., became a bargaining chip in this war, with the government of Israel one day allowing and many, many days not allowing. So if we're talking about 300 or 400 trucks, the minimum required even before this massive destruction was between 500 and 600 trucks per day. Now, what's really awaiting are around 6,000 trucks of UNRWA full of supplies from our warehouses in Egypt and Jordan, if UNRWA, the largest aid agency, hadn't been blocked from the government of Israel from bringing our supplies in. That is what's waiting. However, if there is some supplies that have arrived into Gaza from a border, from a crossing, and is still waiting to be picked up, it's waiting because the process of clearance and getting permits for the UN and aid agencies by the government of Israel is such a cumbersome process that it can take up to several days for the UN to be able to go and collect what has come from the other side. That is where the blockage comes from.
Right. So this, what is touted, it would appear, as an achievement of 386 trucks getting through is basically Israeli Foreign Ministry saying half as much of what's actually needed on a daily basis is getting through. Is that roughly what it means?
That is very much what it means, indeed. So there is nothing to hail, really. There will be something to hail when the border crossings are open, when humanitarian assistance, food, medicines, tents, blanket, fuel are flooded into Gaza, and mostly there will be something to hail and celebrate once there's a permanent ceasefire, which is what the international community has been calling for.
Right, we're going to come on to diplomacy in just a moment because I want to get your views on that just briefly. I know it's not exactly your area. But before that, I just want to ask you, sticking with this issue of food and supplies that aren't getting through, what do you make of this argument that we get told time and time again by representatives of the Israeli government that one of the reasons they don't want food coming in large quantities is because Hamas steals it? What do you make of that argument?
The counter-argument is the finding of the IPC, the global leader on famine and hunger. There is famine declared in the north of the Gaza Strip. There is famine declared because there has not been sufficient quantities of food going into the Gaza Strip since the beginning of this war. And what has been going in hasn't necessarily been the most nutritive. So there has been a lack of fresh fruit, fresh produce, high protein ingredients since the beginning of this war. And so short of calling the prevention of aid collective punishment to all Gazans, the argument is if that is the policy, then the result has been famine that risks now being spread into other parts of Gaza where people are moving to or being forcibly displaced to, such as Deir al-Balah and such as the middle areas, really.
Okay, so just give us an idea of what it's like to be a person in Gaza today. What's the most you could hope for in terms of nutrition, hydration? What would be sort of a typical calorie intake for a person living there?
The prices are extremely high. A bag of bread costs up to $30 per day. That's what the tenfold increase from what it used to cost. A family is very lucky if the family gets that bag of bread, but also a person is very lucky if after queuing for hours, they can get a jerry can of water that isn't necessarily fit for drinking, but at least it's fit for cleaning utensils and cleaning oneself. So every aspect of a Gazan person's life today, especially since the collapse of the ceasefire, every aspect of their life is punctuated with pain, loss, deprivation, hunger, but mostly lack of safety. So the best, to your question, that a person can hope for is not to lose more people from their family.
Now, I wanted to ask you, there's a leaked report which outlines the 21-point peace plan that President Trump is going to be discussing, we understand, later today with Prime Minister Netanyahu. UNRWA gets a mention. It seems like it's expected that UNRWA will be involved in Gaza's future once the hostilities succeed. I say involved in a formal way, recognized by the signatories of that deal, if indeed Israel is one of them. Are you optimistic by any of the reports you've been hearing?
We've been hearing all kinds of reports, and our position has been consistent. UNRWA is the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza because we are the largest with the biggest number of staff, the biggest number of warehouses, the deepest experience within the community, the deepest knowledge of Gaza. But also, UNRWA is very much intertwined with the history of consecutive displacement of Palestine refugees, having registered, recorded all the names of those who have been displaced now for generations. Now, UNRWA also is the provider of public-like services, including education and healthcare. We act kind of like a government, kind of like the public sector. Once there is a ceasefire, inshallah, in Gaza, the only agency or entity that's able to roll out almost immediately emergency education and emergency healthcare will be UNRWA, while other public-like services come back into the picture. We're truly irreplaceable, and that's probably the reason why after months of vile disinformation against the agency in an attempt to undermine us, all of a sudden there's a resumption of mentioning of UNRWA as the irreplaceable UN agency in Gaza and for Palestine refugees in the region.
Okay, and just lastly, we haven't heard about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation for a while. When they first started operating back in May, they were in the headlines daily for sort of all the wrong reasons. And I'm just wondering whether the fact that we're not hearing about them quite so much at the moment means they're getting better at distributing aid and getting aid in, or is there a case of media fatigue at work here?
There's probably a case of media fatigue, and it's good we're not hearing about them because we always used to hear about them in association with the killing of people who are queuing for food. And there is a realization that a makeshift, hasty, inexperienced entity that is highly politicized cannot replace an international UN-led system. And that is why there is, again, very strong referencing of the UN and of the international system. It is the same international system at play in other humanitarian crises. So it was really a lot of time wasted trying to replace that system.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time, I'm told, but really appreciate you speaking to us. Tamara Alrifai, Director of External Relations and Communications at UNRWA. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.